Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. It started with the late nights. He would retreat to his office with no explanation, no reason. At first, I thought nothing of it. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to wonder. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about it felt wrong. One evening, I decided to snoop. I knew I had no right, but I needed answers. What I found that night would change everything. It wasn't just papers or files. It was something far more sinister. A robot? The robot wasn't just a machine. It was her. It was me. It looked like me, acted like me, right down to the smallest details. My heart sank. How could he do this? How could he build a perfect replica of me? It wasn't just about the robot. It was about the betrayal. I wasn't the woman he wanted anymore. He had replaced me with a machine. As I stood there, staring at this creation, a wave of confusion and anger overwhelmed me. My husband had chosen this thing over me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just confront him right away. What if he denied everything? What if it was just a mistake? But how could I mistake something like this? I was frozen, unsure of my next step. In a way, I felt numb, like I wasn't even in my own life anymore. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted, was a lie. I wanted to destroy that robot, to rip it apart, but I stayed still, afraid of what the truth meant. The next few days were torturous. Every time he was home, I found myself watching him, studying his movements. Did he know I had seen the robot? Was he planning to confront me? But he was so distant, so cold. It was almost as if nothing had changed. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. How could I? The man I married had created a lifelike doll to replace me. I had to know why. I needed answers, and I would get them, no matter the cost. One night, when he left for work, I couldn't resist any longer. I snuck into his office, determined to get to the bottom of this. The robot was still there, sitting on the chair, lifeless. My heart pounded in my chest as I carefully examined it. Everything was so meticulously crafted. It wasn't just a toy or an experiment. It was a replacement. I couldn't believe it. The man I loved had been living a double life, one where I wasn't part of it. I needed to confront him, but I had no idea how to start the conversation. My mind raced with 1,000 scenarios. What would I say? I saw the robot? What could I possibly say that would make him understand the pain I felt? The hurt, the betrayal. It was overwhelming. My entire world had just collapsed, and I was standing in the wreckage, unsure of what to do next. How could he have done this to me? How could he think that replacing me was acceptable? The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I found him at home early, looking tired and distracted. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. His face paled when I mentioned the robot. "What have you done?" I demanded. His eyes avoided mine, and for the first time, I saw guilt in his expression. He stammered, trying to explain, but I didn't need an explanation. I already knew. He had built the robot to replace me. I was no longer enough. Why, was all I could ask. The word felt so small, so insignificant compared to what he had done, but it was the only question that mattered. He looked at me, hesitating before speaking. "I just needed someone who understood me," he said quietly. His words hit me like a slap. He didn't need me. He needed a perfect version of me, one that didn't challenge him, one that didn't have real feelings. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the ultimate insult. "I gave you everything," I whispered, my voice breaking, "and you replaced me with this thing?" He didn't respond. He didn't have to. I saw the truth in his eyes. His love for me had faded long ago. I was just a placeholder, someone to fill the space until he could build a better version of his life. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He had chosen the robot, his creation, over the real, imperfect woman who loved him. I left the house that night. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, in that place that had once been my home. Everything felt fake now. The life I had built with him was a lie. I couldn't go back to that. I needed space. I needed time to process everything. I needed to understand how I had been so blind, so willing to ignore the signs that something was wrong. For the next few weeks, I stayed with a friend. It was a relief to be away from him, from the memories of our life together. I needed to breathe. But even in the quiet of my friend's home, I couldn't escape the image of the robot, the perfect version of me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How could he think that this was okay? How could he build a replica of his wife and pretend like everything was fine? He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I couldn't stop thinking about the robot. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Sitting in his office, smiling, waiting. It wasn't just a machine. It was a reminder of everything I had lost. It was a symbol of his rejection, of the life I had thought we shared. I couldn't let it go. I had to confront him again. This time, I wasn't just asking questions. I needed answers. I needed him to understand how much he had hurt me. When I returned to the house, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, looking lost. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "I thought you were gone for good," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to his office and stood there, facing the robot. "Do you even know what you've done?" I asked. He didn't answer, and I realized then that he probably didn't. He didn't understand the damage he had caused. The robot was still there, lifeless, staring at me with its perfect, artificial eyes. I wanted to destroy it, to tear it apart, but I couldn't. It wasn't the robot that hurt me. It was the fact that he had built it in the first place. He had created something better than me, something he thought would make him happy. But the truth was, the robot could never replace what we had, or what I thought we had. I was a person, not a machine. In the following days, I tried to keep my distance from him. Every time I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had replaced me with an imitation. I couldn't pretend that things were okay. I couldn't forget what he had done. I tried to move on, but the image of the robot haunted me. I realized that no matter what I did, I could never go back to him. He had chosen a machine over his wife, and that was a choice I couldn't forgive. I tried to talk to him one last time. "What did you expect to happen?" I asked. "Did you think you could just build a perfect woman and everything would be fine?" He seemed to hesitate before speaking, but his words felt empty. "I thought it would make things better," he admitted. "I thought it would fix everything." But there was nothing he could say that would make it right. I had already made my decision. I was done. As the days passed, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. The man I loved was gone, replaced by a version of himself that wasn't real. I couldn't keep living in this lie, surrounded by a robot that reminded me of my worthlessness. It wasn't just his creation that hurt me. It was the fact that he didn't value what I was. I couldn't stay in a marriage with someone who saw me as replaceable. I had to leave, for my own sake. I deserved more than this. I packed my things, quietly, making sure he wouldn't see me. I had made up my mind. There was no point in trying to salvage a relationship that was already broken beyond repair. I needed space, time to heal, and most importantly, I needed to be away from him. As I left the house, I realized I was walking away from more than just a man. I was walking away from the idea of who I thought I was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I stayed with a friend for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left the house, I felt like he was there, waiting for me to come back, begging me to forgive him. But I knew I couldn't. I couldn't go back to a life where I was no longer enough. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I took up new hobbies, met new people, and began to find pieces of myself that I had forgotten about. The woman I had been before him was still there, buried beneath the hurt. One day, I got a message from him. "I'm sorry," it read. "I made a mistake. Please come back." It took everything in me not to respond. How could I go back after everything? After the robot? After his betrayal? I thought about the message for days, torn between the desire to find closure and the urge to move on. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. What we had was over. He didn't love me the way I deserved to be loved. A week later, I ran into him at a coffee shop. He looked the same, but his eyes had lost their spark. "I never meant for any of this to happen," he said, his voice shaky. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I had already heard enough. "You replaced me," I replied coldly. "You didn't even care enough to fix things with me. You built a robot instead." His face fell, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of regret. But it was too late. The damage was done. The days after that encounter felt surreal. I kept wondering if I had made the right decision, if I should have given him another chance. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't forgive him. What he had done was unforgivable. I couldn't spend my life with someone who thought that a machine could replace me. Slowly, I began to realize that I didn't need him. I was enough on my own, and that was the most important lesson of all. As the weeks went on, I felt a shift in myself. I started to feel lighter, more confident. I was no longer defined by him, by the robot, or by the life we had built. I was free to explore new opportunities, to focus on my own growth. I began to see the world in a new light. I wasn't the woman he had discarded. I was the woman I had always been underneath the hurt, the strong, independent woman who knew her worth. One evening, I found myself in a new city, walking along the waterfront, breathing in the fresh air. It was a simple moment, but it felt monumental. This was my life now, mine to shape, mine to control. I wasn't held back by a past that no longer served me. I had let go of the anger, the hurt, and the resentment. I had learned to forgive myself for staying as long as I did, for allowing myself to be treated the way I had been. I wasn't perfect, but I was enough. The phone rang late one night. It was him. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The version of me that would have picked up that phone was gone. That woman, the one who hoped for answers and apologies, no longer existed. I was no longer waiting for his validation or forgiveness. I had let go of the need to be the one he returned to. I wasn't a backup plan, and I would never settle for being one again. Months went by, and I felt more at peace with each passing day. I had made new friends, created new memories, and built a life that was completely mine. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when I missed the idea of love, of a partnership, but I no longer saw love as something I needed from someone else. I realized that I had the power to love myself, to create a life that fulfilled me, without depending on anyone else's approval. One afternoon, I bumped into an old acquaintance. "You look different," she remarked, studying my face. I smiled. "I am different," I replied. It was true. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I was with him. I had grown, evolved. I was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, I was happy. The past no longer had a hold on me. I wasn't carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. I had forgiven myself, and that was the greatest gift I could give myself. I began to realize that the life I had always wanted wasn't going to come from someone else. It had to come from me. I couldn't keep looking for someone to complete me. I was already complete. I had everything I needed inside me. The robot, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. They were just chapters in my story. They didn't define me. I defined myself. And as I moved forward, I knew that the best was yet to come. The future was bright. I had no idea what would come next, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't looking for validation or approval. I was building my own happiness, brick by brick. I was no longer defined by my past, by my marriage, or by the robot that had taken my place in his heart. I was free to be me, and that was all I needed. And so, my story ends. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic twist, but with quiet acceptance. I had learned that I didn't need anyone to validate my worth. I was enough on my own. The woman I had once been, lost, unsure, and searching for love, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had found herself, who had learned to love herself first. The world was full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them all.